The wine glass in Michael's hand was steady, held with the casual confidence of a young man who had never once wondered about the cost of anything. "To Columbia," he declared, his grin wide enough to suggest he'd just won a lottery he didn't know he'd entered. "Full ride, baby, not merit, not a scholarship, just a gift from the real dad." A wave of laughter rippled through the table. Everyone but me. The ice in my glass hadn't moved. I'd been nursing the same drink since the conversation veered into his college acceptance. And Sarah, my wife, was already flushed with wine, leaning into the performance with the enthusiasm of a lead actress. She placed a light hand on my arm, her lips so close to my ear I could feel the warmth of her breath. "Don't worry, James," she whispered, her voice laced with a smirk so sharp it could cut glass. "His real dad is paying now." It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to flinch, not to tighten my jaw, not to let a single muscle in my face betray me. I simply looked at her, truly looked at her. It was the same face I had woken up next to for 12 years. The same mouth that used to kiss me goodnight after I'd worked double shifts to cover a bill. The same voice that once whispered, "You're the only one who stayed." Now, that voice was part of a chorus laughing at my expense, treating me like a long-term substitute teacher finally being replaced. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. No anger, no drama. I just walked out of the restaurant while their laughter echoed behind me, a distorted, hollow applause. I didn't take the main highway home. I drove the back roads, through the skeletal remains of the industrial park, my car a ghost gliding through the night. I pulled into the garage, killed the engine, and sat in the profound silence, surrounded by the ghosts of a life I had built. Boxes, stacks and stacks of them. One was labeled Michael Science Fair 2014. Inside, the lopsided volcano model we'd constructed from foam and glue, a monument to a shared Saturday afternoon. Another held old Little League uniforms, the cap's frayed seam still showing the clumsy stitches I'd used to repair it. One box even contained the case for his old retainer, a relic from the braces I'd paid for in installments because Sarah said her ex was going through a tough time. I pushed them aside and walked to the steel cabinet in the corner, the one Sarah always joked I kept like a Cold War secret. Inside was a collection of documents I hadn't looked at in years. Paperwork her family never imagined I'd remember, let alone meticulously preserve. I sifted through old tax files and dusty contracts until I found it. A navy blue folder, its corner slightly water-stained, thick with signatures and embossed seals. The trust. When Sarah and I married, her parents insisted on formalizing everything. They claimed it was about protecting assets and ensuring Michael's future. The unspoken truth was that they didn't want me, the working-class outsider, to have a claim to their legacy. But Sarah's mother, a sentimental woman with a fondness for expensive wine, had insisted on a gesture of unity. "Make James the trustee," she'd declared. "It's symbolic, like a wedding ring on a statue." I opened the folder. There it was, my name written in a calligrapher's hand, sole trustee, James Harrison, not co-trustee. Not temporary overseer, sole. The bylaws, drafted by a lawyer who valued arrogance over foresight, were a masterpiece of unintended consequences. Section 9.3. In the event of familial role dissolution, the sole trustee maintains absolute authority to dissolve the trust in full, without cause. They thought they were being clever. They imagined familial role dissolution meant infidelity or a messy divorce. But a footnote, buried deep in the addendum, defined it as any publicly declared severance of paternal or maternal ties by the beneficiary or legal guardian. I closed the folder, placing it gently on my workbench like a surgeon laying out his tools. There was no rage, no tears, just a cold, clear focus. They saw me as the man who paid for soccer cleats and drove the carpool, the man who picked up the groceries and quietly sent tuition checks signed from a joint account, never just my own, the man who kept his head down at family holidays while her father pontificated and her mother curated photo albums of a life I funded but was never truly in. They never thought I'd read the damn documents. They never thought I'd understand the legal architecture. and they certainly never thought I'd use it. But I did, and now I was sitting in a garage, surrounded by the discarded milestones of a child I had raised, staring at the one piece of paper that proved the only permanent thing they ever gave me was the power to erase it all. I didn't sleep, I didn't drink. I just waited for the sun to rise, for the banks to open. Then, I would call the estate attorney they had long since forgotten about and begin the quiet, methodical process of reclaiming everything I had built, funded, and maintained without a single word of thanks. She wanted the real dad to pay. Fine. Let's see what the real dad thinks about paying for a future that no longer exists. The office of Gregory Langley, Esquire, was a time capsule from the late 90s. The same framed Yale diploma, the same faded photograph of him with a golden retriever, the same imposing mahogany desk buried under mountains of paper. Langley didn't even look up as I entered, just grunted and gestured toward a leather chair. "You bring the documents?" he asked, already rummaging through a drawer. I placed the navy folder on his desk. He slid it over, opened it, and his eyebrows arched a fraction. Haven't seen this one in a while. I need a full review, I said, starting with section 9.3. I want to know my options, legally and quietly. He took his time. That was Langley's way. He never rushed, which is likely why Sarah's family chose him. They mistook his deliberate pace for caution. I knew it was calculation. "Trigger clause is still active," he said after a long silence. "No amendments. You're still listed as sole trustee." And the definition of familial dissolution. He turned the document toward me, his finger resting on a highlighted passage. "Public or private disavowal of the trustee's role as a paternal or maternal figure by any primary beneficiary or guardian. Declaration or behavior both qualify." "In plain English?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Langley removed his glasses and leaned back in his chair. "If they say you're not the father, or act like you're not the father, the trigger is valid. You have full authority to initiate dissolution." I nodded. "Good." He stared at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "James, are you certain about this?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." That afternoon, I met with an independent auditor I knew from a past project, Sheila Matson. She was efficient, no nonsense, and radiated an aura of unimpeachable competence. She ran her fingers over the trust documents like a forensic expert examining evidence. "You've got a live trigger," she confirmed, "and a silent board. No oversight committee, no co-signatory." "Correct. Which means if you submit the closure protocol, the assets dissolve into their designated reserve accounts. The family's claim evaporates per the charter." I slid a flash drive across the table. "This contains the redistribution map. I want a new reserve created, entirely separate from the family name. One recipient, a blind scholarship." Sheila tilted her head. "That's an unusual choice." "I'm not an usual man." She leaned forward, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "They'll panic. They'll sue." "They can try," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in a week. "But they're the ones who signed it, and they forgot who was holding the match." That evening, back in my apartment, I logged into the Trust's online portal. It was an archaic system, custom-built by a friend of Sarah's father. No two-factor authentication, no biometrics. Just a username, a 16-digit key, and a single security question. "What name did you say on your wedding day?" I typed, "Sarah." The system unlocked. On the screen, a summary of accounts. Status, active. I navigated to Michael's education disbursement sub-account. A substantial sum accumulated over 12 years of my bonuses, tax returns, and investment dividends. All of it earmarked for him. I clicked transfer to holding reserve. A confirmation box appeared. Yes. Next, I opened the main trust management tab, scrolled to actions, and clicked the bright red button I never thought I'd touch. Mark trust as pending closure. Yes. A small window popped up. Effective date of closure will be calculated in 30 days. All disbursements halted. Notifications deferred until day 27 unless overridden. I let the cursor hover for a moment, then clicked proceed. There was no fanfare, no dramatic sound effect, just a status change, pending closure. That was it. No alarms went off, just the quiet ticking of a clock that only I could hear. I closed the laptop, walked to the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. Not whiskey, not wine. I wanted to be sharp. On the table sat the old folder with Michael's orthodontist schedule. I flipped it open. Inside were appointment slips, receipts, and notes about changing rubber bands. At the bottom was a hand-drawn picture he'd made for me when he was 10. It was me, him, and a dog we never got. I folded it carefully and placed it on the windowsill. Then I sat in the dark, sipping my water, while a family legacy quietly began to unravel, precisely as it was designed to, should they ever forget who I really was. And they had, terribly. The restaurant they chose for the celebration was the kind with valet drivers who judged your car and steaks that cost more than my first week's salary. I parked 2 blocks away and walked, wearing a simple gray blazer Sarah once said made me look capable but forgettable, as if that were a compliment. The hostess barely glanced at me before pointing toward a private room in the back. Inside, the laughter was loud and forced, like a sitcom laugh track. Sarah's parents, Gerald and Margaret, had spared no expense. 2 dedicated servers, embossed menus, and expensive wine already breathing on the table. The room was filled with relatives I had tolerated for a decade, cousins who never remembered my name, an uncle who once mistook me for the IT guy, and, of course, Michael, sitting at the head of the table like a conquering hero. No one saw me slip in. I took the empty chair in the corner, half in shadow, the one nobody wanted. It was perfect. Invisible. Sarah made a grand show of circling the table, hugging relatives with theatrical flair. When she reached me, she gave my shoulder a quick pat, the kind you give a doorman, not the man who paid for her son's wisdom teeth removal. "Glad you could make it," she said and moved on. No kiss, no eye contact, just enough politeness to keep up appearances. Michael was already retelling the story of his acceptance for what must have been the 5th time, embellishing how Columbia had called him personally, how his biological father, Greg, a man I hadn't seen in 15 years, had finally stepped up. They devoured it. Aunt Mara clutched her heart as if Greg's contribution was a divine miracle. Then Sarah's father, Gerald, rose, glass in hand. "I just want to say something," he boomed, a man who believed his voice was its own microphone. "Tonight is about legacy, about real fathers who take responsibility." He raised his glass to Michael, then gave a solemn nod in the direction of the absent Greg. "To the fathers who show up when it truly matters." The table erupted in applause. I took a bite of my dry chicken. Michael didn't even look at me, not once. His phone buzzed and he grinned. Probably Greg. I watched him type a reply, his shoulders relaxed and confident. I remembered him sweating through spelling bees and trembling before soccer tryouts. This version of Michael had no room for the man who taught him to ride a bike, who stayed up all night building science fair projects. Then Margaret, Sarah's mother, clanked her fork against her glass. "One more toast," she chimed, her smile radiant. "To family and the legacy we passed down." Legacy. She repeated the word as if it were sacred. Everyone raised their glasses. I did too, but just slightly, not high enough to join them, just enough to acknowledge the farce. I smiled, a faint, unreadable curve of my lips. I was awake. I heard every word. I understood what they didn't, because a real legacy isn't a dinner speech or a check from a man who was absent for 2 decades. It's the silent, unseen ledger of scraped knees, 2 a.m. emergency room visits, science fair glue burns, and the trust account you quietly build while everyone else is busy playing make-believe. The next morning at 6:03 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open. The trust portal glowed. Pending closure. 29 days remaining. I clicked the final confirmation tab. Dissolution packet. Finalize and submit. I took one deep breath, then clicked yes. The screen flickered. Status updated. Dissolution pending. Irreversible. That was it. No celebratory drink, no dramatic music, just silence. I closed the laptop, stood up, and placed my coffee mug in the sink. Outside, the city was still waking up, shrouded in a light fog. But somewhere in that quiet morning, a fuse had been lit, and they didn't even smell the smoke. The email arrived at 9:12 a.m. on a Thursday. Subject: Trust closure acknowledged. 27 days remaining. It was a simple, automated notification from the trust management firm, confirming my dissolution request had passed its 72-hour review. The status was now irrevocable. Disbursements were frozen. Final liquidation was scheduled for the 30th day at midnight. I created a new event in my calendar. Trust ends. I set 3 alerts, 48 hours, 12 hours, and 5 minutes before midnight, just so I could watch the final seconds tick away. Across town, Sarah and Michael were immersed in orientation prep. I knew this because Michael's Instagram was a highlight reel of their triumph. The latest post, a photo of them in front of the admissions building holding a Columbia banner. The caption read, "Elite begins now." Sarah wore the blazer I'd bought her for our anniversary, smiling as if she were invincible. The irony was staggering. This chain of events was triggered by a minor flag on an internal compliance dashboard at the trust firm. An automated summary was sent to Gerald, Sarah's father. He skimmed it between golf swings at his country club and forwarded it to his assistant with a dismissive note, "Wrong file. Ask Langley to confirm." He didn't call me. He didn't question it. People like Gerald assume their systems are infallible. Langley, the family lawyer, would have recognized my name instantly, but Gerald hadn't bothered to loop him in yet. He was too busy preparing a speech on intergenerational stewardship for an upcoming fundraiser. No one saw it coming, because I hadn't changed passwords or sent warnings. I hadn't raised my voice. When you scream, people build walls. When you whisper, they lean in. But when you go silent, they walk right off the cliff without ever looking down. I opened the confirmation email again and downloaded the attached PDF. It was 6 pages of sterile financial language. Alex's college account was marked reassigned, reserve holding blind scholarship fund. The real estate asset held in a trust shelf for Gerald and Margaret was now marked in queue for liquidation. Even the vineyard stake they loved to boast about had a note beside it. Beneficiary revocation under Section 9.3.3. They had never really read the bylaws. Years ago, when Sarah's mother added me as trustee, she said it was to honor my commitment. The suggestion came after a family dinner where Michael had given me a handmade card that read, "Thanks for being my real dad." At the time, it felt like acceptance. But that clause, Section 9.3.3, was never about honor. It was a hidden blade. It stated, in the event that a primary beneficiary, legal guardian, or associated family member severs or publicly disavows the trustee's familial role, the trustee may, at their sole discretion, terminate or reassign all trust components without consent, notice, or contest. It was ironclad. Right now, Gerald thought it was a clerical error. Margaret thought everything was fine. Sarah thought her son's future was secure. And Michael was busy tagging his biological dad in photos with captions like, "Wouldn't be here without you, Pops." Good. Let them believe it. The university wouldn't flag the unpaid tuition until the second week of classes. The housing office wouldn't revoke dorm access until October. And Gerald's accountants wouldn't notice the missing vineyard stake until the quarterly statement arrived in mid-September. It was all timed, all precise. I wouldn't make a sound. Let the calendar tick down. Let them sleep through the countdown. Because when that clock strikes midnight, a legacy isn't something you toast to. It's something you lose, quietly, completely, and without a single warning shot. It started with a voicemail Sarah ignored. A generic message from Columbia's Student Financial Services. She assumed it was an automated reminder. The second message, 2 days later, was firmer, hinting at an overdue payment. That's when the first crack appeared in her armor of self-assurance. She called the university, expecting a quick resolution, but the voice on the other end was polite, firm, and procedural. "I'm sorry, MS. Wallace, but as of this morning, no tuition payment has posted to Michael's account. Sarah frowned. That can't be right. It's set up to come directly from the family trust. There was a pause. I see the trust listed as the funding source, but nothing has arrived. We sent a notice last week. She ended the call, a feeling of unease settling in. She texted me, Sarah, Columbia says the payment didn't go through. What's going on? I replied 3 minutes later. James, check with your funding source. That was it. No explanation. She stared at the message, then did something she hadn't done in years. She called Greg. He'd answered on the third ring, distracted. The university says tuition hasn't been paid. I thought you were handling it. Greg laughed. What? No, you told me the trust covered everything. Why would I pay for something that's already paid for? You said you wanted to step up. Sure, emotionally. I sent him a care package. I bought him a mini fridge. I never agreed to tuition. She hung up, her face flushed with humiliation. Her next call was to her father. Dad, the university didn't get the payment. Can you check with the trust office? There was a rustle of papers. I'll have my assistant look into it. Dad, I need an answer now. He sighed. Fine, I'll check. But you're acting like someone stole the family jewels. After hanging up, paranoia took hold. She tried to log into the family trust's online portal, a link she hadn't used in years. Access denied. Her hands started to shake. She called her father back. I can't log into the trust portal. He paused. You were never listed as a user, Sarah. That was always between me and James. I thought you were monitoring it. I didn't think I had you. It's James's job. He's the trustee. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. Her voice was a whisper. You haven't heard from him, have you? No. Why would I? Her heart hammered against her ribs. The trust wasn't a vault. It was a locked room, and they had handed the only key to the person they had just publicly dismissed. The person they had laughed at. Now, that key had turned. She sat down, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. James hadn't yelled, hadn't threatened anything. He had just said, check with your funding source. And for the first time, Sarah had no idea where that source was anymore. The second notice came by courier. A sealed envelope from the trust's legal administrator. Gerald's assistant placed it on his desk, assuming it was a routine quarterly report. He didn't open it until after his lunch at the country club. Inside was a 2-page notification. Subject, Final Trust Closure Confirmation. He read it 3 times. Then, for the first time in a decade, he swore, loudly, in his own home. Margaret, he bellowed, storming through the house. She appeared in a doorway holding a glass of iced tea. What is it? It's gone, he snapped, waving the papers. The trust. It's been terminated. Dissolved as of 2 days ago. Holdings reassigned. The vineyard stake is flagged for auction. The Santa Barbara property is marked non-recoverable. The tuition note is deactivated. It's all gone. She paled. But James wouldn't do that. You said he was family. You told me he wouldn't touch it. Sarah, who had just walked in, heard every word. The world tilted on its axis. We made him trustee to honor what he did for Michael, Margaret whispered, her voice trembling. We didn't think he'd ever actually he did. Gerald roared. And now your son-in-law has just detonated the legacy we spent 30 years building. Gone. From the hallway, Sarah backed away slowly. She was not a stakeholder. She was a bystander to her own life's demolition. Meanwhile, I was on a Zoom call with the Grace Marston Scholarship Board, a nonprofit for underserved students. The young woman on the screen, Brianna, was a first-generation college student, straight A's, a STEM prodigy who worked weekends at a mechanic shop. Her voice cracked as she explained she'd been accepted to the same university as Michael. But I don't have the funding, she said. I unmuted my microphone. I'd like to fully sponsor her enrollment, I said. There was a stunned silence, then tears of joy from Brianna. I'm very sure, I told the director. Use the reserve account titled Orion Legacy Reassignment Fund. It's already funded. They were grateful. I ended the call. They were screaming at each other now. I could feel the tremors from across the city. They hadn't just lost money. They had lost control. Gerald had lost his legacy. Margaret had lost her sentimental fantasy. And Sarah had lost everything else. Michael was about to learn that the mini-fridge he was bragging about couldn't pay his tuition, but someone else, a girl they would never know, had just been given a future. And me, I hadn't made a scene. I had simply closed one file and opened another. Laura stormed into my office without knocking, her face a mask of sleeplessness and fury. "You're destroying everything," she said, her voice trembling. I set my pen down. "Define everything. The house, the vineyard, Michael's tuition, my parents' future. What are you doing, James?" "I'm administering the trust according to the bylaws you all signed." "Don't play lawyer with me," she snapped. "Don't pretend this is just business." "You mean don't pretend I'm intelligent enough to understand a contract?" Her mouth opened, then closed. I stood up slowly. "You said he had a real dad now," I stated calmly, "so I stepped aside. Exactly as you wanted." I didn't mean it like that. You whispered it like a punchline. And now you're upset that the joke had a conclusion. Her fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. "You didn't have to burn it all down." "I didn't," I said. "You did. The moment you smirked at me across that dinner table." A silence fell between us, thick with unspoken history. "I thought you'd be hurt," she finally said, her voice quiet. "I thought you'd sulk, maybe cut off Michael's allowance. I didn't think you'd actually read the paperwork." I finished for her. "Understand the mechanisms. Anticipate the outcome." She nodded, like a child being reprimanded. "I forgot who you are when you're quiet. That's because you stopped listening a long time ago." Her voice cracked. "He needed you." "No, Sarah. He needed a story, and you gave him a new one. I was just a placeholder until Greg showed up with a care package. You called it closure. I call it rewriting history." She looked away, her gaze falling on a framed photo on my bookshelf, now turned face down. "You moved it," she whispered. I nodded. "I didn't throw it away. I just reassigned its position." She stood, her movements stiff. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked out, a woman who had forgotten how to occupy the world she once commanded. The meeting was at their country club. Gerald, Margaret, and Sarah sat across from me, a united front of desperation. "We made a mistake," Margaret began. "A misunderstanding. We never meant to alienate you." "Daniel, please," Sarah pleaded. "We were a family. This isn't the way." "What way is that?" "The scorched earth approach." "I'm begging you, reconsider." "Let's cut to it," Gerald interrupted. "You've made your point. You've embarrassed us. Now, reverse it." I reached into my folder and placed a single, highlighted page on the table. "Clause 6.1, I said, and read it aloud. "In the event that the familial role of the trustee is revoked through declaration or behavior, said trustee shall retain full legal right to reassign or terminate the trust at their sole discretion." "What the hell does that mean?" Gerald barked. "It means," I said, "that when Sarah declared I was no longer Michael's father, and you all toasted to Greg, you triggered a clause you never thought would be enforced. You can't seriously believe one comment gives you the right to blow everything up." "It wasn't a comment. It was a verdict, and I accepted it. So this is punishment," Sarah whispered. "No, this is me fulfilling my fiduciary duty. The one you insisted I take. You gave me the keys. Now you're angry that I opened the door. You little bastard." Gerald slammed his hand on the table. "You think this makes you powerful? It makes you pathetic." I folded the paper and slipped it back into my folder. "I didn't write the rules," I said. "You did. You just never thought I'd read them." I stood to leave. "You'll regret this," Gerald called after me. I paused at the door. No, I regretted staying silent for 12 years. This is the first thing I don't regret at all. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday. It was planted in the manicured lawn of the house I had helped pay for, a house that was no longer theirs. Gerald watched from behind the blinds. The house, held in a subtrust for tax purposes, was just another asset to be liquidated. The formality had teeth. Days later, Gerald announced his retirement for health reasons. The truth was he couldn't face the questions. Michael withdrew from Columbia, citing a desire to reassess his goals. Greg, the real dad, had vanished the moment a tuition bill appeared. The legacy was gone. Late one night, Sarah showed up at my apartment. She looked broken. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "I didn't think you'd actually use it. I thought it was just symbolic. I thought you were too decent to defend myself." I asked softly. "I thought you'd just take it, like you always did." "Stay quiet." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading for something I no longer had to give. "I don't have anything left." I nodded. "That's what happens when you build a future on a foundation you never intended to keep." "I made a mistake," she said. "No, you made a series of choices. A mistake implies ignorance. Your actions were born from arrogance." She leaned against the wall. "Can I come in?" I looked at her, truly looked at her for the last time. Then I closed the door, not with anger, but with finality. Orientation day at Northridge College was modest. No banners, no catered brunch, just a quad, some brick buildings, and a quiet sense of purpose. Brianna stood in the check-in line, clutching a folder containing her scholarship confirmations. Her mother, Melissa, stood nearby, wearing her only nice blouse. She used to be a colleague of Sarah's, back before Sarah's life became too important for old friends. I spotted them by the coffee table. Melissa's eyes widened when she saw me. "You really came," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I said I would." Inside the auditorium, the dean spoke of perseverance. Brianna's name appeared on a slideshow. Grace Marston, full ride recipient, Brianna Wells. She blinked, and her mother gasped softly. After the ceremony, the dean shook my hand. "May I ask why you chose her? Out of all the applicants?" I looked over at Brianna, who was helping another student with their luggage. "Because she never once made me feel like a placeholder," I said. He nodded, understanding completely. Later, as I was leaving, Melissa approached me again. "Laura doesn't know, does she?" "No, she'll find out," she said. "People always do, just not in time to stop it." She offered me something I hadn't received in years, a genuine thank you. I paused. "You were the only one who never treated me like I was temporary." She gave a sad laugh. "That's because I was always one mistake away from being temporary myself." Across the parking lot, Brianna waved, her new dorm keys swinging from a lanyard. She looked grounded, at peace, like someone who understood the true value of an opportunity. I got in my car and drove away. No fanfare, no goodbyes. The trust was gone. The house was gone. The legacy, the speeches, the phony toasts all gone. But I was still here, quietly, finally, standing on my own. And on that small, unassuming campus, a future was just beginning. One that had been earned, not inherited.